Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming tonight. I am Angel Mary Bernadette, Agnes Joan Teresa, but if you can't remember my name, you can call me Aggie. This is my friend Harriet, who's up from Rumford tonight. She's come a long way, so I know you'll be pleased to see her again this year, even though she's in mourning. Still.
Again, perpetual mourning.
Yes. So before we start our show this evening, we'd like to say a couple thank yous to people that help make tonight possible. Along part of our 22 volunteers, it takes a lot of people to put the show on. Mark Stevens, our cemetery historian, who works with Debbie and I from the very beginning, okays the scripts that we write, and he's just been there throughout and wanted to say thank you. The library staff, everybody there for selling the tickets every year and promoting us to people and letting us put the sign out. Chris McLaughlin is doing the recording tonight for the archive file for the Historical Society and for posterity. But we wanted to give two quick real shout outs. One to Beth Blair. Look at the set design she's done. She's posted things on Facebook. She's updated things. She got us in the newsletter. She's done everything.
She made all these tombstones.
Which are actual tombstone pictures from across the street.
Yep.
So she did all this. I mean, she's just helped us so much. We don't know what we'd do without her. And last but not least, by sure, is Donna Julian. This year, for the first time, we had an understudy. So she had the most unglorious job. She had to learn all the parts, be there for everything, rehearsals, be there last night, tonight, tomorrow, and hope we don't need her. So, a big, huge thank you to everyone and all the 22 volunteers that helped us this year. Takes a lot of people to put this on. Just want to say thank you and sit back and relax and enjoy our cemetery walk this year. Thank you.
And now that we're leaving, she's going to go up, I'm going to go down, and we're going to take Grim with us.
Okay. Okay, Grim.
Come along.
Good evening. It is so nice to be back here in Canterbury Center. Though things look a little different than I remember, I do recall some of the buildings that are surrounding us. Please allow me to introduce myself. I am Captain Jeremiah Clough. In 1736, I was the first white male settler born in this town. My father was also named Jeremiah. Most people just called him Colonel. He was the town's first white settler, and then he commanded the Canterbury Fort down on Center Road. So am I to understand that this year you and your countrymen are celebrating the 250th anniversary of the beginnings of the War for Independence?
Yes.
Wow. So that makes this year 2025?
Yes.
Oh my. I could barely get my head around that or comprehend all of the changes that have occurred since I've traveled these roads. You must be wondering why I traveled here tonight. Well, I was asked as part of these festivities if I wouldn't mind sharing some stories of my patriotic endeavors so long ago. So of course I said yes. Immediately after the battles of Concord and Lexington, I was commissioned a captain in the brand new Continental Army. And I was asked to raise from men in Canterbury one of 10 companies that would make up the 2nd New Hampshire Regiment. You could probably guess that many men stepped forward, and they're from families whose names you would recognize today. There were Glines, there were Heaths, there were Morrells, there were Fosters, there were Forrests. Cousins enlisted together, brothers enlisted together. And they joined others who had already signed up, like Samson Battis and Nathaniel Pallett and George Shannon. You'll hear more from poor George in a little bit. Well, my regiment was stationed on Winter Hill outside Boston for 7 months in 1775. And then tragically, in 1776, we were ordered north to Canada. And we spent 12 miserable months there. It was part of the ill-fated trek to Quebec that was led by then Colonel Benedict Arnold. My friends, calling it ill-fated is a compliment. It was a disaster. You'll hear more about that later tonight as well. Somehow I survived, came back to Canterbury to recover, and while I was here, I and 3 other men were accused by men from Boscawen of being Tories. Can you imagine? I, a captain in the Continental Army, accused of being loyal to the king? The 4 of us were thrown in jail in Exeter, held there for 4 months until we were finally exonerated in the fall of 1777. I got involved in that whole affair because of family and my relationship with Dr. Philip Kerrigan of Rumford, the place you now call Concord. I like Rumford. It had a ring to it. Well, Philip was falsely accused by the tongues of malicious persons of being a Tory. Well, it turned out he was married to a cousin of mine, so he was family. And what does family do? We allowed him to hide in our hayrow, and we provided him food and drink. It was a sorry affair. Well, after the hostilities ended, and after my battle for personal honor, my civic duties continued for a long time. I was a member of the Constitutional Convention in 1781, and also in 1788 when New Hampshire ratified the Constitution of the new United States of America. It was said that I was the wealthiest and most respected farmer in New Hampshire, and that my vast orchard was the largest in the country at the time. Well, in my 82 years, I was married twice, I had 5 children, and everyone said, and you can read it in the newspapers, that I maintained my senses to the end. And I have to agree. The end came for me in 1819. I died and I was laid to rest near the family property on Pillsbury Hill, down near the end of Center Road. And there's a nice monument there that the town erected in my honor. You might say I was very grateful. Actually, eternally grateful. And you can come visit me there. Yes, all you need to do is travel down Center Road, almost to the corner of Route 132, which we called Northwest Road back in the day. And there I am on the north side of the road, the right side of Center Road. Love to see you. So, my fellow patriots, the fact that you are here marking the 250th anniversary of the beginnings of this great country tells me that our ordeals were well worth it, and I would do it again without hesitation. So that's my story. Thank you so much for listening. Please come visit me up on Pillsbury Hill, and have a good night.
Good evening, and welcome. My name is Jemima Morrill, and I was born in 1712. When I was 19 years old, I married my second cousin, Deacon Ezekiel Morrill. But before you raise your eyebrows, it was not uncommon at that time for second cousins to marry. My husband originally came to Canterbury to inspect 40 acres that were given in trade to his mother, Elizabeth. He liked what he saw and ended up buying 4 more lots, which included this entire resting place and the parsonage lot across the street. We moved here in the spring of 1750, and that made us the first Morrill family in Canterbury, the first of many Morrills to come. I loved my dear Ezekiel, a little too much, some might say, as together we had 15 children. But don't ask me to name them all, though ma'am, you look interested, so I will. My first was Abigail, who lived just a year, followed by David, a second Abigail, Reuben, Elizabeth, Laban, Susanna, Mary, little Ezekiel, who lived just a short time, but he was followed soon after by another Ezekiel who survived. Then there was a dear baby boy who never drew breath, but he was followed by Maston and Sargent, Abraham, and finally another Susanna. Oh, I do love the name Susanna, don't you? I was extremely proud of all my children, but especially proud that 6 of my sons served in the Revolutionary War. Now, if you were listening carefully just a minute ago, you would have noted that I actually had 7 sons. My poor Reuben was killed by a tree before he ever got a chance to get a shot off at those nasty redcoats. I myself died in 1775, just as the war was getting started. But I heard tell that all my sons survived their tours of duty, and tonight I want to share with you some of their stories. So let's see. Abraham, Ezekiel, and Laban, they fought in the Battle of Bennington, Vermont, where 2,000 colonists defeated a division of Burgoyne's army. Decidedly defeated, I might add. And then Laban, he rose to the rank of lieutenant, and he fought again at the Battle of Ticonderoga, which was America's first offensive victory of the war. Now, I'm not saying it was because my Laban was there, but you can draw your own conclusions about that. David and Maston, they fought in the crucial Battle of Saratoga, which was the turning point of the war. But then, after we gave the British a drubbing there, they tried to invade New York from Canada. Well, my Maston, he fought them there again, in the company of Canterbury's own Captain Jeremiah Clough. Now, you just heard from Captain Clough, but I don't know if he mentioned my Maston. Sometimes he's a little forgetful, but that's another story. My son Sargent, he fought down in New York at defending the critical port and denying access to the British to the Hudson River. Now, one moment. Let's step back just a little bit. Before any young New Hampshire man marched off to war, he had to sign a loyalty oath. It was officially known as the Association Test. I do happen to have a copy of it right here. All young men were required to sign that, with some exceptions. And I must apologize to my modern audience, because the exceptions were no idiots, no lunatics, and no Negroes. But the pledge reads like this. We, the subscribers, do hereby solemnly engage and promise that we will, to the utmost of our power, at the risk of our lives and fortunes, with arms, oppose the hostile proceedings of the British fleets and armies against the United American colonies. We had 197 signatures from Canterbury and Loudoun, but don't ask me to name all of those. However, you, sir, look like you might be a military man. You might be interested to know who these people were. Well, perhaps some other time. I fear I'm forgetting something. Oh, yes. Tonight I was also asked to speak to you about the train bands and the alarm lists. They were both critical parts of the colonial militia. So the train bands were young men who had their own drums, flutes, and banjos. You don't quite look like you believe me, and that's because that is not true. These young men regularly banded together for military, not musical training. They were expected to have their own firearms, and they were the primary defense of the community. However, they were not combat units. During wartime, men were selected from the train bands, and then they were formed into the fighting units that actually went off to the battles. The alarm list is pretty much what it sounds like. It was a list of slightly older men in the community, up to about 65 years of age. They only fought when a message or an alarm was received of a military threat. Canterbury was very lucky. We never had to call out our militia, but of course many colonial towns did. And I'm sure you're familiar with the story that came out of the Revolution. In April of 1775, a group of patriots in Boston, Massachusetts, saw a band of 700 soldiers start to march towards the city of Lexington. 2 messengers, Paul Revere and William Dawes, they galloped ahead to spread the alarm. This gave the militia a critical heads up and allowed them to claim victory in both Lexington and in Concord. Now, I died in November of that year, but even I heard of Paul Revere's midnight ride. I'm sorry to say my time here grows short, but I will finish with a little bit of news from the home front. 7 of my children, they settled in Canterbury. 4 of my sons, David, Ezekiel, Laban, and Maston, and 3 of my daughters, Abigail, Elizabeth, and 1 of my Susannas. We have 66 named Morrells buried in the cemetery and a large monument honoring the Morrell family and my sons. Even Reuben is mentioned. My boys and this town did our duty fighting to form these United States. There's a saying that I learned from my Irish neighbors underground, and it goes like this: the dead are never really dead unless you stop talking about them. So we thank you for inviting us back here this evening and listening to our stories, because it makes us feel so alive.
Well, hello and welcome. It's so nice to see you this evening, and it is nice to be seen. I tell you, it does my heart glad to see that you're hearing about the adventures and the sacrifices of the Continental Army 249 years ago. Hard to believe it's been that long. Well, my name is Asa Foster, and I was born in 1765. Now, that would make me exactly 15 years old in 1780, old enough to enlist and serve in the Continental Army. Can you believe that? 15 years old. So, who would have ever guessed that would have, they sent me to West Point. And I would have never guessed that I was going to be witness of a major historic event. You see, they put me under the command of General Benedict Arnold. I was on his staff, and I actually was his bodyguard for some time. 15 years old and General Arnold's bodyguard. Really? Well, you know what happened. I actually saw him escape to the British ship Vulture, and I watched the whole treasonous aftermath. George Washington was there too. But I'm glad to report that everything turned out okay, and West Point was saved. Hallelujah. So I survived the war, and I served many years in the state militia as a colonel. And I lived here in Canterbury on my farm. And I married my sweetheart, Sarah Morrell. Together, we had 12 children. I know. I lived a good long life, and I passed in 1861, but right before I passed, Fort Sumter fell, and someone heard me say, "If I was a little younger, I would shoulder my musket and I would march to the defense of my country." Oh well. Anyway, who would have ever guessed that I would have lived to be 96 years old, and my wife of 70 years lived to be 90 years old? Good genes, eh? I'd say so. So, we were proud of all 12 of our children. We raised them to be abolitionists. And I want to quickly talk about my daughter, who is Caroline. I have so many children, it's hard to remember which one. Yes, Caroline. Caroline was a brave soul. She had high morals and was very anti-slavery. And she actually was ostracized by the neighbors for her views. She was not afraid to speak her mind, and she was part of the suffrage movement for the vote. And she also was part of the Daughters of the American Revolution. Caroline, she was well educated. In fact, she taught in New Hampshire, taught school in New Hampshire and in Erie, Pennsylvania. She never married, but she eventually came back to Canterbury to care for Sarah and myself in our old age. God bless her. Now, she's buried right over there next to us. She died in 1910 at the age of, wait for it, 94. Told you, good genes. And she's over there with next to me and our family and our other relatives. There's a whole group of us over there. I have to say, I feel so grateful that I was laid to rest here in Canterbury, and I wish you all the same good luck to yourselves. In closing, I say, God bless America, and good evening.
Well, good evening, everyone. It's so good to see you here. Thanks for turning out tonight on this chilly night. My name is Margaret Sutton. However, if you look me up in your town records, you will only see me listed as the widow Sutton. And that's because, well, women were not really considered independent creatures back in the 1700s. So it was 1774 when my family moved to Canterbury. We had 5 sons and 1 daughter. My husband died shortly after we moved to town. And my daughter Mary, well, she sadly only lived to be about 4 months old. But I had 4 sons who lived full lives well into adulthood. My young Edmund, though, he died just before turning 17, which was, of course, old enough for him to have been married and to give me a grandson. So about a year after we moved to town, the big war broke out. This is what you would refer to as the War for Independence. The government actually required that 20 men sign up right away to fight. And now Canterbury at the time included Northfield and Loudon, but I'm very proud to say that 31 men stepped forward to fight, including 3 of my boys, Stephen, Michael, and John. John has always been told he looks just like his mother. My boys fought in many battles, including one you just heard of, if you were listening, the Battle of Bennington. And I'm very happy to say all 3 of my sons returned home safely, safe and sound. Sadly, this was not the case for all of our Canterbury families. Besides George Shannon's family, who you will be hearing about soon, 6 other families, Canterbury families, felt that bitter sting of war. Now, while the men were away, life had to go on here in Canterbury and across the country. So it was a time when neighbors stepped up more than usual to help out neighbors, and women took on new jobs. They picked up the plows and plowed fields and picked crops and milked cows. But you know, women took part in the war in other ways as well. I would really like to tell you about some of those ways if you don't mind listening. So for one, women were nurses. And this was dangerous work because those army hospitals were full of diseases and filth. Now, their duties included things like feeding and bathing and cleaning and administering some basic medical care, as well as offering comfort and support to our soldiers. It was the nurses who would often help the wounded soldiers read their letters from home or help them write letters back home. So their role was really crucial in not only the health, but also the morale of our troops. Ooh, and listen to this one. Women were spies. Yeah, you see, officers from both sides talked freely around women. If they even noticed a woman was in the room, they certainly didn't believe that she could understand all their military terms and strategies. And so this provided an opportunity for some brave women to be spies who could collect top-level information. So one of these women I heard about, her name was Lydia Dara. And she overheard some British officers talking about a pending attack. And she bravely spread that word to an American soldier who passed that information along up the line. And George Washington himself, he was ready for those British troops when they arrived. All because of her. Yeah. Women also followed the camps around. They helped with preparing meals to feed our soldiers. They mended their uniforms. They cleaned up. Now, Abigail Adams, a name you may have heard of, right? She was the wife and advisor to John Adams. So it's been told that at one point she went around her home and gathered up much of her own silver and steel to have it melted down to make musket balls for the troops. So, of course, women were not allowed to enlist. But this did not stop some women from fighting. There were women who would disguise themselves as men. I mean, they had to wear pants. Oh, maybe that's not so unusual now. But they had to wear pants. And they used fake names, and they enlisted, and they fought. Some of these women fought for long periods of time right alongside their male counterparts. Probably the most famous was a woman named Deborah Sampson. So Deborah enlisted under the name Robert Shirtliff in the Massachusetts Continental Army, and she served in many battles, fought her way through many battles of the war. Right near the end of the war, this is quite a story. Right near the end of the war, she's in a battle and she sustained 2 wounds. She got shot in the thigh and she got a sword cut to her forehead. And so, of course, she was rushed off to the Army hospital with all the other wounded soldiers. And there, they treated her head wound, no problem. But she knew she had to leave that hospital before they could treat her thigh wound and discover her true gender. So she managed to escape, and that left her trying to treat her own wound with a penknife and a sewing needle. Brave woman. Well, her leg never did fully recover. But all in all, Deborah Sampson served for 17 months before being discovered and then discharged. So that's just a few stories, right? And I am very proud of my 3 boys. And I'm very proud of all the men who served their country. But I do believe that more women should be recognized for their contributions and sacrifices that they made for their country. Don't you agree? Yes. Well, thank you for listening to this old woman ramble on. I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening.
Good evening, fellow patriots. My name is George Shannon. Welcome. It is so good to see my dear Canterbury after so many years. It's looking good, isn't it? Warms my heart to see it again. I hear you're listening to tales of our war for independence from British rule and the hated King George III. Well, I have to say that I can contribute but little of my short time in the Army, as I was killed on Bunker Hill. But I'm glad to do what I can to help, as I was glad to do what I could then. I was part of the New Hampshire 1st Regiment under the command of Colonel John Stark. We marched from Concord to Medford, Massachusetts. In addition to myself, there were 26 other fellow Canterburyans there on that momentous day. we had gotten new intelligence that the British Army had plans to occupy the Charlestown Heights across the Charles River from Boston. By sunrise on June 17th, we were in a solid defensive position and ready. 500 of us protected the left flank, encountered 2 British charges before running out of ammunition and had to orderly retreat. I'm proud to say that the British suffered over 1,000 casualties, more than twice our casualties, but unfortunately myself and 32 other New Hampshire patriots were killed that day on Bunker Hill. They carried me to the Salem Street burying ground back in Medford. I am grateful that I'm listed on a memorial that is erected at the Bunker Hill training field in Boston. I was sad to leave my dear wife Mercy and our 6-year-old son. But we both knew that it was time for good men to come to the aid of their country, and I was proud to do so. Of course, I was further saddened that I didn't return home. But it lightens my heart to know that my fellow Canterbury neighbors and friends looked out for my family in my absence. I've heard some interesting news recently that hopefully you can enlighten me on the truth. Do I understand that after the last Memorial Day, which is a holiday that you celebrate now, honoring patriots who have fallen like me, that the town came together in donations and money to erect a monument in my honor? Is that true? Yes. Well, I confess I'm at a loss for words at hearing that. I am also at a loss to describe my gladness that we persevered against all odds and won against tyranny and are now called the United States of America. It seems our little experiment actually came forth and has blossomed. My goodness, I'm glad that my death at the age of 32 on that hill so many years ago was not in vain. Well, I'm sorry, I can only tell you about that one battle. But thank you for coming out tonight, and thank you for the memorial.
Good evening, kind folks. My name is Sally Forrest Gilman, and I am so proud to speak with you all about my father, William Forrest. Actually, I think I'll start with my grandparents, William and Dubia. They came to this country from Ireland in 1744, and they lived in Boston. But Papa was born in the old fort that used to be on the corner of Center Road and Route 132, where Canterbury ended and the wilderness began. Actually, it is quite built up around here now, isn't it? I don't recognize much, except that that is the road that used to lead to the fort. Now, where was I? Oh, yes. So in 1774, my father, he established a little settlement on the Canterbury Northfield town line today. And he cleared a few acres and the year following put it into grain. But then he had to leave for Bunker Hill with Captain Jeremiah Clough and others from Canterbury, including several cousins and uncles like my Uncle John and my Uncle Robert and Uncle Jeremiah Gibson. They fought the battles of our country. Papa was 22 years old. He was part of the Quebec force led by Colonel Benedict Arnold. They were 1,100 men strong, but by the time they reached the St. Lawrence River, only 600 sick and malnourished men were left. Papa used to tell frightful stories of starving while fording ice-cold streams and impenetrable swamps. Many of the men were barefoot and their clothing threadbare. Most of the men were captured or wounded or killed. But God saved my father. He was one of the few who survived. He suffered greatly from wounds and sickness, but after recuperating, he took part in the battles of Bennington, Stillwater, and the Rhode Island expedition. before he was able to return home at last to take up his life's work of farming. My father was so proud to say that for 60 years he planted his own corn. Well, Papa married my dear mother, Dorothy, right after the war in 1782. And he built a log cabin right on the shore of a pond, which I understand still bears my family name today. Would you believe that they raised 12 children in that cabin? Oh, did I mention that my Uncle John also survived the war? Unfortunately, he lost his leg, but he was known around town as Soldier John, and he would go house to house and cobble shoes or run pewter spoons. But I digress. My father, William Forrest, he was a firm Democrat, and all of his sons and grandsons followed in his example. He was never absent, but once, from the annual election. Shall I describe my father to you? He was benevolent. He was industrious. He was honest, strong in fraternal affection, and had great fortitude and fixedness of purpose. He was a supporter of the church, though not a member, but he left great evidence of his faith in the Redeemer. My father died with less than an hour's sickness at the age of 87, having 14 children, 41 grandchildren, and 12 great-grandchildren. Even now, I am so proud of Papa and his service to our beloved country and for the man and father he was to all of us. And I am so pleased to have spoken with you all this evening. Thank you so much for listening. Have a lovely evening.
Good. Shall we bow?
Thank you for coming tonight. I know you enjoyed it. Thank you so much. We're hoping they're all willing to come back next year. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.